Hello, TechNation! Thank you for tuning in to today's Webinar Wednesday. The turnout for today's presentation has been remarkable, with over 425 attendees registered. TechNation's free Webinar Wednesday series is a way to educate and provide valuable information to the healthcare technology industry. Today's webinar is eligible for 0.1 credits towards requirements needed for certification from the International Certification Commission. Many of the same speakers and presentations from our webinar series are featured at our biannual MD Expo. Our next MD Expo will be held March 29th through the 31st in Nashville, Tennessee. Please visit www.mdexposhow.com for the entire educational schedule and for registration. A few notes before we begin. A survey about today's presentation will appear on your computer screen immediately following today's webinar. To receive a certificate of attendance, you must submit the survey. Certificates will be emailed on or before March 5th. If you do not receive the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Earlier today, registrants were emailed a Webinar Wednesday workbook. If you did not receive a copy, you can download one now by visiting www.iamtechnation.com/webinars and clicking on today's presentation. During today's webinar, all lines will be muted, but you can submit questions during the presentation by using the questions feature on the dashboard on the right-hand side of the screen. If you're having difficulty, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Before we get started, TechNation would like to thank our sponsor, Trisonics. Trisonics specializes in ultrasound service and support, ultrasound systems, ultrasound parts, and ultrasound transducers and probes. Trisonics is an ultrasound imaging partner dedicated to providing its customers with cost-effective solutions and exceptional personalized service. With expertise in multi-vendor system repair and sales, our experienced staff will effectively guide you to the right solution for all of your ultrasound needs. Visit www.trisonics.com to learn more. Our presenter today is Hobie Sears, Senior Territory Manager at Trisonics. Hobie has a BS in Electronics Engineering Technology and over 25 years ultrasound service experience, including 13 years of multi-vendor. He has developed numerous ultrasound courses and has taught hundreds of engineers on ultrasound topics. Hobie, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. And we're coming to you from still chilly Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the home office of Trisonics. Thanks for everybody attending today. Thanks for TechNation for providing this avenue for us via webinar. So as they explained in the introduction, I have been doing this for a long time. As I tell everybody, you put me in a hospital in an ultrasound department, I know what I'm doing. You take me out of the ultrasound department, not so much. This is all I've ever done is ultrasound service and help everybody out in the ultrasound arena. As such, Trisonics is also an ultrasound-specific ISO. This is what we're really good at. This is why we are experts in what we do, and this is why we think we can help provide information to everybody else out there as to how to become an expert as well. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And so the question may be, why talk about this? Why present a conversation about becoming an expert? And that was a question that we started asking a couple of months ago when we were thinking about what we're going to talk about this year. And what we're going to, each year we talk about what do we want to portray to the industry? More than just talking about Trisonics, what are we going to do? How are we going to help teach people? And over the years, ultrasound companies in general, we keep talking about the same basic common things and not upping the bar, not talking about the next advanced topic. So last year, Trisonics took the avenue of talking about troubleshooting image quality problems, really looking at the hard stuff in ultrasound and not the easy things. So we wanted to take that a step farther and say this year, let's talk about what it takes to become an expert. Let's talk about what it takes both technically and from the mental aspect of becoming an expert. So we just want to continue challenging you and those that work in this industry to move forward. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So what makes an ultrasound engineer an expert? In my opinion, its desire to be an expert is the most important quality. It's not easy to be an expert at anything, so you must be willing to pursue it. If you're not willing to pursue it, you're probably not going to be an expert. The next thing is understanding that ultrasound is not a less important imaging modality. Sometimes in a hospital facility, because ultrasound isn't a radiated type of imaging, ultrasound gets demoted to a lesser category in the mind of some administrators and the mind of some engineers even, that it's not considered to be as important as MRI or CT, and maybe in some situations an individual feel that way. But ultrasound is a highly effective and generally a money-making imaging modality for most hospitals. So, and then experience. Of course, to become an expert, you have to have experience. But that doesn't mean that you have to work on ultrasound every day. It doesn't mean that you need 20 years of experience. What it does mean is that you need to focus on gaining experience. And through today, we're going to talk about the things that you can do to kind of gain experience faster, to move you further ahead on that curve towards gaining experience. And first of all, if you desire to gain more experience, in my opinion, you will. You will get that experience and you will get it quicker. So let's go through this and we'll see some ways to go about getting some more experience and the things that we need to do to tackle this. We're going to put this in the frame of building bridges to become an ultrasound expert. Why bridges? Well, really, the first thing is when you do these talks, you just need a way to convey the topic. You got to have something. We could go keys to success, keys to becoming an expert. I picked bridges. But I picked bridges because bridges are difficult to build. They really are. If we talk about making roads, we talk about doing things, talk about crossing a divide, building a bridge is really a tough thing to do. And in the same aspect, it's not easy to become an expert at anything. It's not easy to become an expert in ultrasound. Doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile to do, but it's just not easy. So you're sitting here and going through the first few slides of this presentation, you're like, oh, well, what if I don't want to be an expert? What if, I really just don't have time to be an expert? Then take today and ensure the people that you are using are experts. Take the information I'm going to provide for you and make sure, that the folks that are going to come in and work on your machines are experts. I mean, you deserve that. Your hospital deserves it. Your patients deserve it. And don't make the assumption that because somebody works for a big company that they are an expert. Look into who they are and what they are and their training and their abilities. So as we move through this, we're going to talk about some technical aspects of being an expert in ultrasound. We're going to talk about some non-technical things, the soft things, I guess, so to speak, that it comes to being an expert. Because it is more than just fixing the equipment. In my opinion, becoming an expert begins with servicing or fixing the equipment. And then it moves to taking total care of the customer. And it is about owning the responsibility of all of that and the responsibility of ultrasound as a modality from the engineering perspective. So we're going to talk about 5 technical things or semi-technical things, the things that we do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And then we've got about 4 non-technical topics. Working on each of these and achieving each of these will go a long way in helping you become an expert and in the process gaining that experience that we talked about a few slides ago. So bridge 1, know the unit you're working on. As anything as engineers, we must have an understanding of the units we're working on and repairing. Okay? So maybe that is through some sort of schooling. Maybe it's through job shadowing. Not all knowledge has to be learned in the classroom. A lot of it can be learned on the job. But it shouldn't be in such a way that you're just fighting to get through it. Because to me, that's not really knowledge. That's just getting through it. And it is experience, and it's all good. But if we're just trying to get done with something as a repair on a unit, as opposed to learning while we're getting through a repair on something, it's much more important to learn while we're doing it. Take the extra 15, 20 minutes when possible and try and figure out really why something failed. What was the reason that this happened? What is the theory behind it that makes sense that it is this part that failed? So it just comes down to knowing why something failed, what it is that you can predict maybe the next time when you see similar symptoms, instead of just memorizing the failure and basing it on, well, the next time I see this, I know it's going to be this part because I'm going to memorize the failure. That isn't always true, although sometimes it is. Next is you must take responsibility for your own learning and advancement. If you're going to be an expert and you want to be an expert, then take the responsibility to go in that direction. You're going to have to challenge your managers. They often need to be convinced of training and the fact that you want to do this, that you want to move to that next level and be stronger technically and with the modality than you are now. And then as you're moving through that and looking at different things like training or tools that you need or whatever else it may be, you know, you have to prove out that it's really worth the time and money. Not all training is. Some of it is. Some of it may not be. Not all tools are necessary. But then again, there may be some tools that you don't have today that you've learned through extra work and extra experience would be helpful in the future. If it is, you need to be able to prove those cases to your managers. My guess is that if you truly do prove those cases, you're going to be greeted typically better off than not. Bridge 2, know what ultrasound units are in your facility. I think it's a pretty simple line to draw that you can't be an expert on something if you don't know it's there. So we often tell folks when we're going into facilities and when we're starting and initiating service with them is that the first thing we want to know is detailed inventory of what they have. We don't want to have to go back and look at an ultrasound machine every time we get a phone call asking us to repair something or fix something. We want to already know what that unit is. If we have those units under contract, we've already gone in and it's not just, you know, it's a Philips ultrasound machine or it's a GE Logic 9. It's more than that. We want to know the software level, the year that it was made, if a cart type matters. The Philips IU22, IE33 is very specific to cart types. We want to know what that is. The transducer inventory with serial numbers. We want to have all of that. Sideline here, I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with it or experienced it, but we hear once every few years about transducer theft. That's a real and very valid concern. So knowing what transducer inventory you have with serial numbers can help, you know, prove that you have or haven't lost something over time or something hasn't disappeared. Again, it comes up more than you might think. And then last, you know, is there system-specific information such as video card types or CPU versions or monitor types. Those are all things that we want to have. And personally, I carry an Excel spreadsheet with me all the time that has nearly every unit I've ever worked on for the last about 15 years, ever since I've been doing multi-vendor. It has hundreds of units and information, just like that, just so that I know when somebody calls me, I have a lot of information available to me, and I don't have to bug people, and I don't have to keep tracking things down. Moving on to bridge 3, system backups and presets. This is one of those things that we talk about a lot, and I said we've kind of moved our talks on, and we're trying to talk about new things. This is something that we've talked about for years, and it's something that we continually talk about. And we talk to ourselves about this as well as we talk to everybody in the industry about it, and other companies talk about it as well because this is so important. If there is nothing else that you do in ultrasound, this is the one thing that you can do immediately that will have an impact certainly sooner than later. And that's making good system backups and presets of the user customized features of your ultrasound machines. The different products have different ways of going about doing that. Most of them are fairly intuitive. Some of them you may need some help if you've never done it before. But getting these system backups and presets together and having them makes us all look like experts. Not having them when things go wrong can absolutely make us look like we're fumbling along. And it's one thing if we come in and we never knew the ultrasound machine was there and something happened and it's a new situation. But if we've been servicing that unit, or you guys have had that unit under your care for a long time, and the unit loses a hard drive or the software needs reloaded, and we don't have the system options to load back in, or the presets to load back in, or the IP addresses to put back in, it can delay a service call for at least hours. And I've actually experienced days of downtime over these types of things. And this isn't the kind of thing that we run into every now and then. I run into this on a pretty consistent basis. Usually 3-4 times a year, I have a situation where I get called in on a machine I've never worked on before, and there is no preset disk. Either there was one once and it disappeared, or no one had made one, or the ones that's there is 5 years old and everything has changed. So it doesn't really provide a tremendous amount of help. And when that happens, the recreation time of all of that information is easily extra hours. And I've had it run. I had a hospital situation probably about 1.5 years ago where this occurred, and we had everything but the unit's IP address. And it was a particularly special situation, and only one person had that IP address, and that person was on vacation. And we literally had to wait for 3 days for that to come back. So even though the unit was fully up and running the same day that they placed the service call, they weren't able to use that unit for 3 days because there was no IP address and we couldn't send the images. So system backups and presets are so important to do. So when could you make a system backup or a preset? After every change to the unit and on every preventive maintenance. That's my opinion. That's when I do it. If you, or anytime I come onto a new machine for any reason at all, I make a preset disk. I prefer, generally, machines that you can do it to, I prefer to do it on a CD or DVD. I do not load multiple copies in the same CD or DVD, and the reason is that it's too easy to scratch or lose a single CD. And if all of your copies are on that one CD and you lose that, well, you don't have any extras. Or if that one CD gets scratched and is no longer any good, you don't have extras. But if you have 5 or 6 backup CDs on one unit, at least it'll be close. At least that would be something. So I always suggest to everyone that they just have, each time they work on a machine, each time they make a change, particularly DICOM or network changes, make a backup. If your unit is the kind of unit where maybe it doesn't store the IP address on the disk or it doesn't restore it, the Logic 9s are a great example of that. And also quite often on the Philips 22s and 33s, they will often not restore their IP addresses. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depending on situations. Write the IP address right on the CD or DVD. And it's right there, and it's super easy, and everything goes very well. The last thing I'd like to say is I know a lot of engineers that they do this, and they make backups, and they're really good about it, but they put them in their desk, usually under lock and key. Well, that's good, and that's actually great. The problem is, if I get called in, it's probably because they're on vacation or they're out sick, and then I don't know where that is and don't know where to find it and wouldn't expect it to be under lock and key. So what I would say is leave a copy with the unit. Take a second copy back to your desk. That way you know you have a copy that's secure, because we know they can walk away. But try and leave one with the machine, because that's where us as a service representative coming in from outside the hospital, we would expect it to be with the machine. So the next bridge. We talked just a little bit about preventive maintenance a second ago, in that when we're doing PMs, we want to make a backup. But to move on to PMs, this is a chance to excel as an expert in ultrasound. And most of us don't view PMs this way. Most of us view PMs as routine, rudimentary, something we just have to get through. It's a requirement, and those things are all true. I can't argue with any of those, and even for those of, been doing this 25 years, I've done a lot of PMs on units, and they do get, at times, a little boring. But it really is our chance to excel. It's when, as an expert, you not only can practice the things you've learned, you can also re-engage with a unit that maybe you haven't seen a lot lately, or practice on a unit that maybe you haven't taken apart in a little while. And so when we're training new people, I always tell them that this is practice time. Yeah, it's a PM, and we're trained and we know what to do, and we can get through the PM. But this is also the time to get in there and make sure I know everything I'm supposed to know about this unit, from taking it apart to making preset discs to checking the transducers and the monitor and all the buttons on the user interface and cleaning the machine out and following the checklist. And depending on how you're accredited, whether you're in cardiology or radiology or vascular, and different accreditation societies require different things, you're going to have a checklist and you want to go through that. But what you don't want to do is just get through the PM. It's just a time to re-immerse yourself in that particular unit. And I think it's one of the most overlooked aspects of the PM. And that way, when it does come to servicing it, you can roll in. You've hopefully done a PM recently. You're familiar. You're able to just dive right into the problem, and you're not sitting there for the first 15 minutes kind of rethinking about what this machine is and how to open it up and those kinds of things. So what should expert PMs include? Talked about a few things a minute ago, but here's the kind of overview list. And a big thing is checking the system operation, including all the user interface access points, really testing things. Not just relying on the sonographer saying, I don't think this button's right or that button's right. Of course, we want to hear that type of information from them. But we want to be sure that we're also checking it. Maybe we're going to find something that they didn't know about or they weren't sure about. So also checking power supplies, adjusting if necessary or possible. Looking at monitors for density burn-in. And we know there's questions out there right now about some of the new things from ACR and looking at luminosity. Unfortunately, that's a huge conversation, and there's not time today for that. But if you have questions, ask them. We will get back to you offline about that. Cleaning the system, verifying the mechanics of the unit, functional wheel and brakes. Many of you may not know that ACR actually requires the wheels and brakes work correctly. That is part of their accreditation. You should also be doing phantom imaging and imaging yourself, not only for the PM, but also for the practice. We're going to talk about imaging more in a little bit, so I'm going to leave that and we'll come back. Again, system and preset backup. We've already beat that horse, but it should be done. Basically, the way I look at it, if I serviced a machine 2 weeks ago and I come in and do a PM, I'm going to make another preset backup during that PM. For most machines, it's a fairly complex system to create a backup disk, so I'm actually testing the machine's ability to be able to do that and pull that off correctly. It's actually a little bit more complex than what we might think. So it's a decent test of the machine's ability to function at that level. Again, capturing transducer and also system serial numbers, all the serial numbers you would need, and then any other items that are required for whatever accreditation you're doing. So that's, in my opinion, this is the minimum list of things that should happen during a PM. And which probably means your PMs are going to take you a little bit of time, and they should. Probably not a 20-minute episode. This is something that, for most of us, it's going to take an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half, and maybe longer, depending on the unit and that kind of thing. So, Bridge 5. And we keep this under the technical aspects of things because I am talking technically here. You need to have a support structure. If you're going to be an expert at something, it's amazing. Experts have other experts they turn to. That's just the long and short of it. Physicians do it. They just call it consulting. And I can guarantee you it's a practice that occurs many times a day, on every day at Trisonics. I do it every day. When faced with a variety of problems, I call other engineers at Trisonics. I'm not stuck. I'm just making sure that I'm looking at all the options. That, maybe somebody else has a different way of looking at something than I do. And, I may not use the information they've given me. I might, but I have that support structure in place. One thing we can say, support structures need to be built. They don't just happen. If you happen to work for one of the groups out there where you have built-in tech support, that's great. Utilize them. But I can guarantee even there, if you call those guys on a routine basis and they develop a relationship, you're probably going to get slightly better support than if you call them once a year with just a single question. The support structures need to be built. And then last, you need to trust the individuals that are helping you. Because if you're calling folks that you're just not sure that you trust, you're probably not going to believe what they say anyway. Or you don't believe they're at a level of expertise enough to help you. So put some effort in developing a support structure. It's important. It's things that we think about in our day-to-day, and it would be good for you guys as well. So we're going to move now into these kind of softer, non-technical aspects or bridges of becoming an expert in ultrasound. And it's these are probably the things that are much more different for us as engineers. We're used to the technical. We're used to the nuts and bolts and the electrons and that kind of thing. This is the stuff that's a little different. And for ultrasound, it can be a lot different because of the nature of ultrasound and that it is just a little bit of a different modality to begin with. So, but experts understand their field of interest, and that's a general topic. I mean, whatever you're an expert in, if you're an expert in photography, you understand the field of photography. So if you're going to be an expert in ultrasound, you should have an understanding of the field of ultrasound, which would include basic knowledge of ultrasound physics and properties. And you don't need to be an ultrasound physicist. You don't need to be a physicist at all. But understanding a little bit about how an ultrasound signal flows out of a transducer and comes back will certainly help you in your quest to become an expert. You should also understand the modality and the concept of the different ultrasound studies performed. What is happening clinically in the department? What kind of studies are going on? If you cover cardiology, do you know the difference between a regular echo and a stress echo? And do you know why a sonographer gets really excited if they have a problem during a stress echo and what that means? And because having that knowledge will help you understand, why that was a bigger issue, why that was a bigger deal, and it increases your goal of becoming an expert. Learn to see the ultrasound image, to have a general idea of what you're looking at, not a clinical idea of what you're looking at. Ultrasound is known for looking different. Like I said, I've been doing this 25 years, and I still hear it today. Ultrasound just looks weird. And, okay, sure, it does. Doesn't mean you can't understand it. It doesn't mean that with practice it's unreadable. And again, not from a clinical standpoint, just from a standpoint that if somebody throws a kidney up on PACS, you would understand it's a kidney or a liver or a heart. Those kinds of things. Also, take an interest in and be able to answer questions about the ultrasound environment. Probe care and handling, I can tell you that the number of questions coming to us about transducer care and handling and disinfection is at a higher level today than I think I have ever seen it in my career. We are talking about transducer care and TEE care and endovaginal probe care and disinfection almost nonstop. And so be engaged in that. Your departments have questions, be willing to help them find those answers. And we can help you if you guys so choose. I mean, that's fine. but mostly get engaged in that conversation. And then last, don't treat ultrasound as a lesser modality. Experts, if you want to be an expert in ultrasound, experts are proud of their field. And you will find this, if, we always say ultrasound is a tight-knit community, those of us that have worked in it this long. And the one thing I will tell you is that if you find folks that have been doing ultrasound for even a few years, they're going to be incredibly proud of the modality of ultrasound. It's just something that goes together. So I would say, you know, join the wagon, jump on board, and learn as much as you can about it. So bridge 7, understanding sonographers. A couple of years ago, while teaching classes, it seemed I never would get through a class, and I would teach 2-3-day courses on systems, and I would never get through a class where there wasn't a number of comments from the engineers about how difficult it was to work with sonographers doing the studies. And it really got me thinking, and I think I've come up with some things that might help understand the sonographer from your all's point of view. And I will say a caveat to this, my wife is a sonographer, so I have some leeway in saying the things I'm saying. I think I have a pretty good idea of how they think, how they go about their day. And of course, I've worked with them for a long time. So let's look at some aspects of working with a sonographer, and then we're going to get into some other details here. And maybe this will help you guys on a day-to-day basis think about who they are. And you can really take a lot of these and apply it to other modalities and really even nurses sometimes. Some of these things may as well fit in there and might help you in other aspects as well. So first, sonographers can be demanding. It's true really in anywhere in the hospital, right? Folks that work with patients, when things don't go perfectly well, they can be demanding. They want things to work in a particular way every single time. This next one is kind of a surprise to a lot of people, and when I say this, I often get a strange look because ultrasound machines in and of themselves are technical, but sonographers are often not technical. They are very good with their units. They're professionals with their ultrasound machine. Don't let yourself believe because they're professionals with their ultrasound machines that they are technical in the same way that we are technical. Their technical ability is specific to what they're doing, where our technical ability is specific to helping us fix things. Therefore, we look at things in a wider field of view. We're going to look for things they naturally would not. And because of this, sonographers can be truly not helpful due to this lack of technical ability. And when there's a problem, I mean, how many times have we had issues where an error message occurs on the screen, but the sonographer didn't capture that error message? And without a doubt, if you let them talk, they're going to say, I was turning to take care of the patient or to talk to them. And that's the next key. They're incredibly patient-centric. And we think of things always about in frame of the machine, but to the sonographer, the machine is a tool that helps them take care of the patient. And that's part of the process of just thinking about it and understanding them. Sonographers are also held to a high standard, and we're going to talk about that right now. So here's a few more details. They are very educated imaging technologists. I'm not going to take anything, I'm not saying they're more or less than CT or MRI techs or nuke med techs, but I would say they're all really pretty close. Sonographers, you know, it's a multi-year degree. They have to learn cross-sectional anatomy, which is no easy task. And according to an ultrasound school in Ohio, where I know the gal that runs the program, the question list for sonographer certification is longer than the Ohio Nurses Board exam. Now, that's not the actual questions on the test, but it's the list from which they study. So it is significant, and their boards that they have to take are very challenging and very difficult. And there are multiple modalities in which most ultrasound techs, sonographers, have to be accredited through now. Interpretation of the exam is common practice, provided to the reading physician. And so while many of the sonographers are not technical, they are very well educated. And just because that doesn't always relate to the ones and zeros in the computer world or what happened when there's an error there, don't assume that they're not educated. And then last, in Europe, most people don't realize this, ultrasound exams are generally only performed by doctors. There are a few sonographers in Europe, but it is by far very few, probably less than 5% of the exams, just a guess, but it's very few. So last, let's talk about this thing called the sonographer-patient relationship, because this is a truly unique feature in ultrasound, and I believe it is the key to a lot of frustration at times from myself, and I know from other engineers in the field, and not outside of a hospital, but even in a hospital, that we don't often get the information from a sonographer that we would desire. Or why does a sonographer react to something that seems relatively benign on a machine? But let's talk about this. So what it is, in ultrasound, is the only time when the technologist is touching the machine and the patient at the same time while the scan is occurring. Let me explain that. In other modalities, the technologist positions a patient and then basically goes to the unit and tells the unit what to do, and then the unit scans or take a picture. CT, you get everybody prepped, you put them in there, you go to the CT control room. Pretty much the same with MRI. X-ray, you position them. You go around the wall, hit the button. Nuke med, very similar. You know, you're positioning and then letting the machine take over. In ultrasound, it's not that way. In ultrasound, it is the sonographer that is the conduit between the machine and the patient. So they're touching the machine and the patient at the same time. And that's why when we have little things on the machine that tend to seemingly drive the sonographer crazy, that we may not as engineers understand why that's a big deal. Well, what's wrong with the light on your keyboard that's blinking? Well, the sonographer, that may be a distraction. And if it's a distraction, then they're not looking at the monitor and they're not focusing on the patient. They're being distracted by a blinking light. And it's not a one-time thing. That's blinking, you know, that may be blinking all the time, or it's in the peripheral vision. The things they're looking for on the monitor are generally not incredibly obvious. Sometimes the lesions or the tumors are very difficult to see. And honestly, in a blink of an eye, they can be missed in some cases. So things that distract them are very difficult to deal with. That also explains why a stuck key or a freeze button that you hit that doesn't freeze, or it freezes and unfreezes quickly, can be a problem. And it's because in the end, any problem with the machine causes them to focus on the machine and not the patient. And the ultrasound tech, the sonographer, they are trying always to focus on the patient and not the ultrasound unit. So maybe that'll help. I really thought about that a lot over the last few years, and even me doing this as long as I have, I still keep this whole concept in the forefront of my mind all the time, and trying to always make sure the machines are working as perfect as absolutely possible. So Brig 8, scanning. If you're going to be an expert in ultrasound, this is probably an area where many of you are going to have to step out of your comfort zone. And for me, I had to 25 years ago. At the time, I was lucky. I worked for a company called Accuson, and they taught us to scan as service engineers. It was just something that, at the time, they were teaching us to be experts from the beginning. Unfortunately, I would say a lot of the manufacturers today aren't doing that. They're not necessarily teaching their guys to be experts, but it's a different conversation for a different day. But at the time, they did. And, we're not being taught to scan anybody else. Figure out how to scan yourself, and we'll talk about how that happens. I am not clinical. I have no clinical training, formal training at all. but I can scan myself. And I can scan myself on many different ultrasound units, and I know what I look like on all of those units. So that really, really helps when it comes to working on ultrasound machines, whether it's a PM and verifying operation, or whether it's when they're broken and actually verifying a failure or that I fixed it. Scanning yourself is definitely something that, as an expert, you want to learn to do. So, what do you scan? So if you're going to become an expert and you want to learn ultrasound scanning, what on yourself have you scanned, or should you scan? And I would say most ultrasound service experts have mastered these three basic scans. That would be your carotid, your liver and or kidney, so they're right there together, your heart, and then, you know, if as an extra, learn your thyroid. These types of targets give you a nice range of different tissue types, blood flow velocities, different depths, so you can really properly interrogate an ultrasound unit. Also allows you to move from the vascular department to the radiology department to the cardiology department and scan something in each of those departments. It is just something that will help. You don't have to look beautiful on these machines to do this. You just have to know what your scan looks like. Maybe you're a very difficult scan. Maybe you can't scan your liver or kidney. Maybe it just never looks good. Well, if it never looks good and it always looks the same degree of bad to you on that machine, that's as good as that machine's going to do for you. That's fine. But at least you know that. And if you scan on another machine and it, you know, or one that's broken and you can't see anything at all, you know that it doesn't even look like normal. That's what you're looking for. So where do you go to learn to scan? Well, the reality is you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to stay in your hospital to learn to scan. One thing I didn't mention about sonographers a minute ago is most of them enjoy helping others with their expertise. What is their expertise? It's scanning. So ask a sonographer or two to help you learn to scan. You know, I can't even fathom that they would not be willing to help in some way. And it accomplishes two things. One, you learn to scan, at least a little, and then you can get better over time. And scanning is one of those things that the only way to get better is experience. But if you're in a hospital, you could have experience every day if you really wanted. I'm sure you could get on an ultrasound machine at some point during the day for 3 minutes. And that's all it would take, is 3 minutes at a time. You did that for a month, you'd be an expert scanner on yourself. Second, sonographers who help you learn to scan are very likely to be very supportive of you when it comes to service, especially if you have a department that you think is challenging. Maybe they don't like the idea of in-house service taking care of their equipment. Who knows what the issue might be. If you ask them to teach you to scan, they're going to have ownership in that game. And because of that, they're likely to be more supportive of you. Sonographers can also talk with you about safety principles. Ultrasound is non-radiating. It really isn't anything of concern, but there are official principles and policies to be aware of, and they can explain all of that to you. So I would learn to scan. It's something that we all do, and it's very important to the day-to-day expertise in being working in ultrasound. So Bridge 9, service delivery. This is a little bit touchy subject, I think. This is actually one of these subjects that we debated talking about at Trisonics, but we felt it was necessary to talk about. It's one of those situations where quite often if you talk to somebody that goes to the doctor and they're supposed to tell the nurse everything about them, but they won't tell the nurse, but they'll only tell the doctor after the doctor comes in. That sometimes happens when we come in and do service in hospitals, where the ultrasound techs won't tell you something. They will only tell us things, and we just want to make sure you all understand that we're not there to get in front of you, and we want to be sure that everybody is aware of that. And these are small issues, But we think, it's the kind of issues that can be resolved, and maybe they don't affect you at all, maybe they do. But these are the kind of things that I get told by the sonographer when you're not in the room. And we're just being honest and saying, hey, look at these things and be aware of them. And if they don't affect you, that's awesome. And if they do, and maybe you change something, if it works out, that's great too. So we get told that they worry because you're not an expert. Whenever I hear that, I always remind them that I'm part of your support structure. And that's what, you should, be talking to the ultrasound techs, the sonographers, the managers of the department that, hey, when a problem comes up, you're there. Maybe they don't view you as an expert. Maybe they know that you're new at doing ultrasound. Let them know, hey, we've got, our group that we work with, whoever that may be. Well, maybe it's Trisonics, maybe it's Siemens, maybe it's Philips, maybe it's somebody else. We've got them on the line. We're talking with them. Our support structure is in play, and we are, we're attacking your problem. That will put to rest many of their concerns. The next thing is sonographers don't like something I have termed as stealth service. Stealth service takes two forms. I know a lot of departments, a lot of engineering departments like to do this, and I can't argue with it, but at the same point, I have been told this many times by the sonographers that if you guys grab the machines and take them down to your shop at the first sign of trouble to work on it, I understand that's where your tools are. It's probably easier. There's a lot of things to do. But here's what the sonographers are thinking. They believe that you're doing it to hide the fact that you don't know exactly what's going on. I've been told this a number of times over the last 5 years, and I'm often surprised. Well, I'm always surprised when that occurs. And I just say, no, they're taking it down there because it's simply easier to work on. But just be aware. So if you're going to do that, just be sure you address that issue. That hey, we're not running and hiding with your machine. It is simply just easier for us to take it down to our shop to work on it. And maybe maybe in your hospital that's just normal business. Everything goes back to the shop to be worked on. If so, that's great. I just want to let you know that it's the kind of thing we've heard many times. Second form of stealth service is coming in and doing service and leaving without telling them, or doing PMs after hours and not telling them. I've heard that many times. That, guys come in, they do service, they leave, we don't know, and it all just goes back to communication. And frankly, you guys probably do communicate, but because it's after hours, it doesn't seem like it. And maybe one person got a note or something that you left, and because you're not there in front of them, the worst thing is you're getting the work done and you're still kind of getting not the glory because not everybody was aware of it. So I know a lot of guys do that because they simply are leaving that time during the day to do patients, which is what everybody wants. So I would just say if you are doing service after hours, I would just make a point of it to get back around to them the next day or the day that you're going to do it. Just make sure they know that that's going to happen. Because the stealth service thing is certainly the thing that I've heard the most throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And it's easily correctable. Putting the repair in the entire unit. Experts do this. And it's not anything that, people generally do on purpose. It's something that they do generally accidentally. But this is one of the things that we get talked to about, that, folks come out and you may change out a monitor, but there may be a broken cosmetic piece on the unit. And instead of actively doing that, you wait for them to mention it to you. I've been told many times that it's the, you're trying to move on to the next thing really quick, and we're all busy, and you get distracted. But it's just a matter of, owning that repair as an expert, taking that whole thing on. When you look at a unit, I'm here to fix the monitor, but wow, you've got a cracked knob or something else, and I'm going to get that done right away. And that goes along with the, oh, by the way call, and you're at lunch sitting there in the cafeteria, and a sonographer comes up and says, oh, I've got a broken whatever. And is it really our fault that we forget those things when we're at lunch? Probably not, but from their perspective, it might be. They're like, well, I told you about that 3 days ago, and you're thinking, yeah, it was at lunch. So I would just say to, as much as possible, remember those types of things. You guys in the hospitals, you guys really are. You're moving around all the time, and you got a lot on your plate. So just letting you know that these kind of comments have been made over the years, and, they're pretty simple things to move through. So, crossing the bridge. Where do you go? What now? How does it start? Well, first, you have to decide, is becoming a true expert in ultrasound what I'm going to do? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. If it's no, you can still work on ultrasound. I mean, certainly. But at some point, you're going to need an expert. So be sure you have one, whoever that may be. But if you decide to become an expert, so where are you going to go from there? I probably have these things in the wrong order. Get your manager's buy-in. Really, it probably should be develop a plan for training, both technically and in the modality. And then get your manager's buy-in. But either way, you need to do those things. You need to develop your support structure. And then last, you need to involve the ultrasound departments. And again, it's because if they help you, they are more likely to support you. So, our part in the journey is, if we're near you, we can help you. We also really believe in doing exactly what I'm doing right now. We believe in providing challenging and strong training and talks to engineers that desire to learn. And we have other things that we can talk about. We said last year we talked about image quality. We can talk about that still. We have other things to talk about, transducer disinfection, probe care, those kinds of things. If you're interested in any of that, let us know. If we're geographically there, we can deliver those things to you, generally always for free. So feel free to contact us about that. So as we wrap up, we'd just like to say thanks to each of you for attending. We are going to have a question time now, and I think Bethany's going to come back on the line here real soon, and we'll go through question and answers.
Yeah, I'm here, Hobie. Awesome presentation. Thank you so much. That was great. We have quite a few questions for you, so we'll just start with the very first one. Can you address transducer leakage limits?
Well, we really can't address the limits because I don't have the documentation in front of me to tell you what they are. As a practice, what we would say is that certainly transesophageal probes should be leakage tested, honestly, before each patient. At a minimum, they should be tested often, and transducers, I guess the more regular transducers, there is no absolute requirement, whether they be done, at PMs or otherwise, but testing them on a frequent basis is not a bad idea at all. And but they should be inspected first to be sure that they are not cracked. You do not want to inject a bunch of water into a transducer, and that takes us into another whole issue. So we could follow up with anybody directly about specific limits, but unfortunately I don't have that technical documentation in front of me, nor would it be quick enough to do in this particular moment.
Okay, great. On that same topic, should probe leakage testing be done during PM on all transducers?
It is, and I alluded to this in the question before, it is a decision that can be made at the facility level. Some manufacturers actually do require it, and we're seeing it more and more. Not every manufacturer out there requires that it occur. So as a facility, you should probably make a decision to do it or not to do it. And then once that, once you make that decision, you're obviously going to have to stick with it. It is certainly probably a better idea to do it on every PM, but I can't sit there and tell you that it's a requirement in every situation with every manufacturer. It sounds like I'm talking in a circle, but that's probably the best answer.
No problem. What are your thoughts regarding cloning system hard drives?
Cloning is a practice that is used routinely. Now, here's the, of course, if you're truly cloning the drive to another drive, you have to fit into the form-fitting function of the FDA type stuff, or we don't want to use a different type of drive. That doesn't mean you can't use you can't go from a Hitachi drive to a something else drive, Western Digital or something like that. But I'm not sure that it would be okay to go from an IDE drive to a SATA drive. Those are different types of drives, and that might just raise a question as to whether that would be okay from the FDA perspective. I'm not saying either way at the moment. I know we would not do that at Trisonics. We would only use an identical type of drive, although it may be a different manufacturer. Outside of that, cloning is just a computer process, and there is no data that would specifically say there's anything wrong with doing that over loading software. The one thing we would say is that a machine should probably never be cloned that contains patient data. So you would want to wipe the patient data before you did that, just to make things, frankly, just easier. It's easier to do.
Great. What are you looking for when you're scanning yourself during a PM? What area of the body should you scan during a PM?
Okay, so the area of the body that you're going to scan during a PM is going to be based on the transducer and or where you are in the hospital. Obviously, if you're in the echo cardiology department, you're going to scan your heart. If that's all they do and they don't do vasco in that department, that's all you're going to scan. And so that's what you're going to do. If you're in radiology, obviously in radiology we can get into things like intercavitary probes. Well, to be a little weird, we don't think anybody's going to start using those during a PM. But, certainly you can scan your, liver and kidney with traditional abdominal probes. If they have small parts probes, that's where the thyroid would come in. You can scan your thyroid, and that's a nice small parts image. And then if you're in the vascular lab, it's very easy to scan your carotid artery, and that would be typical. If you really got advanced, you could scan your the veins in your calf. But most field engineers, most service engineers don't go to that degree, but there are some neat things you can do. What are you looking for? You're looking for the image to look like it always looks. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for, especially during a PM, that's all you're looking for, is you want it to be consistent. Your body as a whole is going to look pretty consistent. Now, some days, depending on what you eat, frankly, may make that a little bit worse, a little bit less, or how much caffeine you have could change things a little, but in general, you're going to look consistent over time.
Great. Another question for you, Hobie. What probe measurements are required by ACR to be done by the OEM, ISO, and how often?
Well, ACR right now, and there's a lot of question about this, I guess, but if you hash through all of what they've said, and I haven't looked at the requirements now in about 45 days, so if anything has come out in the last 45 days, I will plead ignorance, but I don't think anything has changed. Really, when it comes down to it, you need 1 PM again, and that's what it came down to. Now, they do want some quality assurance to occur during this time frame. And what it comes down to is for each probe, you need a horizontal and a vertical measurement on each transducer. What I do on my PMs is I take 4 images for each probe. I take kind of the whole field of view of the probe, and all of these being done on a Phantom. I take a horizontal measurement, a vertical measurement, and then I also take a picture of the black cystic area. One of the most important things an ultrasound unit has to do is be able to resolve a black area as being truly black and not look like it's filled in. That would be actually very bad in an ultrasound system.
Okay, great. Another question for you. What things really create interference to any ultrasound unit?
Okay, so when we're talking about things like radio frequency or magnetic interference, the list of things that can create it are huge. I can run through the short, most popular list. That would be things like dimmer switches in rooms, Ethernet cables, lamps and gel warmers plugged in on the same circuit are quite often culprits. And what we would just tell everybody, the short answer, and we actually have a much longer talk on this, but the short answer is if you're experiencing some sort of interference on your ultrasound machine and you think it may be coming from outside of the ultrasound machine, that's not the probe or the machine, take that machine, put it in an x-ray room, hopefully as far away from the ultrasound department as you can get it, close the door, and see if you have the problem in there. If you're on a different electric circuit, and then certainly the lead-lined walls are really going to help cut down on everything else, you should start to be able to figure out if this is RFI or if it's something from the machine. And remember, the machine itself could be emitting RFI that it itself is picking up, so that's possible. It does happen. So that would be it. If you're talking about areas like surgery, there's all kinds of things going on in surgery, Bowie knives and all, just a number of things that will create really harsh RFI. Now, those should be able to be tracked to the particular times those devices are being used. And when they're not, that RFI should go away. So that's the short answer. But if you have other questions on that, feel free to contact us because it's a much longer discussion.
Okay, great. Another question for you, Hobie. Because my facility uses different manufacturers, does being an expert on one manufacturer also make you an expert on other manufacturers or models?
It goes a long way. There's no doubt. If you're an expert in ultrasound, you can take that knowledge you have about the modality, as an engineer, and you can apply that to any ultrasound machine. Now, does that mean that if you have a bunch of GE units that you know how to do everything on, and you have a Siemens unit, are you going to be able to walk in and load software without any knowledge at all? Probably not. But are you going to be able to walk in and look at the image and the transducers and interrogate the machine? Probably so, if you've developed your ultrasound skills. And the more you do of that, the easier it is to do. For folks like us that are truly multi-vendor, sure, that's how we start with every machine. Every new machine that comes out, we take our expertise that we've had for years and we apply it to that machine and then go through the process of learning everything else. Now, we do that in a very compressed and ramped up fashion and kind of have a methodology of doing that. But that's exactly what you want to do. So take your expertise, apply it, and then learn. So does it truly make you an expert on the next machine? Maybe not, but it gets you a long way to being an expert.
Great. What is supposed to constitute user training after installing a new U.S. machine for a facility? I'm not 100%
sure I understand the question, but I would assume that they're talking about applications training. If that's what we're talking about, that should be, you know, if a machine is sold and whoever sold it is providing applications training, then that should be a truly a clinical person. If it is somebody that's an engineer, they should also be clinical, coming in and going through the features and functionalities of the machine and setting up the machine with the sonographers and going through that. Being phrased in the phrase user training, if this is something that's more along the lines of what might be called knobology training, that could be done by a service engineer where they're just coming in and kind of taking what the ultrasound tech knows and working with them to understand how they apply what they know to the machine. So more of a detailed tour of the machine as opposed to a clinical training on the machine. Hopefully that answers that question. If not, please give us a call.
That sounded great. Is there a specific tool for transducer calibration?
The only real tool would be a Phantom. It is the accepted tool. Those of us that have been doing this a long time, we can all complain and say Phantoms aren't perfect, and they're not. And there's reasons that they're not perfect, but still, when it comes down to it, it is the accepted tool for checking to see that your transducer's measuring correctly and that kind of thing.
Perfect. Can you recommend some things that people can use to disinfect transducers?
I can recommend that you go to your manufacturer's websites or user manuals and use what they tell you to use. If I told you anything else than that, it would be wrong, because they are the only ones that can specify that, and then it comes down to finding something they say you can use that also agrees with what your hospital guidelines and rules say about disinfection. Do not make an assumption, however, that because one product from Philips can use a certain disinfectant or sterilizing agent, that another product from Philips can use that. That is not always the case. Or transducer. You really need to look into that and look at specific transducer types and specific transducer models and the units themselves. We are finding a lot of people are using cleaners on the units that are really not approved, and they're actually causing the plastics to discolor or get brittle, that kind of thing. So the only true answer is look at the manuals. We can, some of that I have, and I've pulled most of that off of the internet, and feel free to contact me if you can't find it.
Excellent. Another question for you. Are more hospitals going with their machines being ACR accredited?
Actually, where I live, it has kind of gone the other way lately. I'm based in Southwest Ohio, and I have a number of facilities that are ACR accredited, and then I just had a major hospital group leave ACR and switch to AIUM because they were just tired of the nonsense with ACR. That was their reasoning. I had, they just told me about it. I had nothing to do with the process of selection. So I think it just depends on what the hospital has decided. Sometimes they stick with ACR and radiology because they're using it for MRI and CT, and they just stick with it with ultrasound. But there are other options out there. In cardiology and vascular, you're using different societies probably anyway. ICAEL and ICAVL for cardiology and vascular are valid societies, and they provide accreditation as well.
Great. Another question for you. How important to an expert in ultrasound is it to find good suppliers for parts and probe repair?
It's very important because you're only going to be as good as they are. And whether that is the manufacturer all the time, whether that is an ISO, whether that is a large company that sources and resells, that's the only person that can answer that would be you. But this comes down to part of your support structure, and mostly you have to be able to trust them. You have to be able to trust them. You have to be confident that they have your back and that they know what they're doing. And so part of that developing of that support structure is asking them questions and making sure that they can support you, making sure they understand what they're doing, and to have a relationship.
Great. And Hobie, this is the last question. All other questions can be addressed offline. But to wrap up today's webinar, how do you know what probe is used for which application? For example, a 91-D versus a C1-5-D probe.
Sure. With some manufacturers, it can be really difficult. In our transducer courses that we write, we actually usually will have a slide or 2 or 5 on how that manufacturer goes about naming their probes and what that naming sequence means. And that can take a little bit of hieroglyphics to answer. What I can say is that if you engage in these conversations with sonographers and you simply ask them to explain, they will. They will tell you what is good for one, what is good for another, and that's the best answer. You know, we can talk about, you know, what megahertz is used in this part of the body or another, but that would all leave our mindset here very quickly. What I would challenge you to do is go talk to your sonographers. Say, hey, look, can you run down this stuff for me? And they would be more than happy to do so. And then usually you can pick up on how the manufacturer is going about their naming convention. And then once you understand that, you can start to apply that for those manufacturers. Some of them almost seem to be unintelligent. You just can't figure out because there's just too many letters and names and they don't make sense.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hobie, for the informative presentation. We sincerely appreciate your time, Trisonics support of our Webinar Wednesday series. Attendees, remember a survey about today's presentation will appear on your computer screen immediately following the webinar. To receive a certificate of attendance, you must submit the survey. Certificates will be emailed on or before March 5th. If you do not receive the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com, and you can visit www.imtechnation.com/webinars to sign up for an upcoming Webinar Wednesday. Thanks again, Hobie, and we look forward to seeing all of you at the next Webinar Wednesday.